All right, I'm in Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5. This is a continuation from the previous message of verses 3 through 5. So I need to start there and at verse 3 and remind you that what this is the beginning of a description of two different people. In verse 2, he said that we are to walk in the love that he has for us. And then in verse 3, he says, but, which means that there is an alternative. But, there's another way of life, another way of living. We're going to move into the idea of two different kinds of people. Okay, and when people don't see that he's talking about two different kinds of people, then they try to blend the two different ideas together. And when you do, you end up with a lost person who has no hope and is going to be under the wrath of God. That's effectively where it goes when people don't understand that there's a contrast between verse 2 and verse 3 in the following verses. The contrast has to do with two different kinds of people, those who are saved and those who are lost. Okay, now of those who are lost, there are going to be two other ways of understanding a person who is lost. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. And that has to do with those who live for the indulgence of the flesh and those who live by the restraint of the flesh. Both of them can still be in the lost category. Okay, it's not just those who live for the indulgence of the flesh. Okay, so in verse 3, but fornication and all uncleanness or covetousness, let it not even be named among you, as is fitting for saints. Neither filthiness, nor foolish talking, nor coarse jesting, which are not fitting, but rather giving of thanks. All right, I'm going to come back to this idea of giving of thanks at a later time, because he has this as a but. It is another thought, something else, of what it means to live by our thankfulness for what he has done and for what he has given. Okay, that's the but transition, the holy but, that makes the transition to talk about, a different person. But we live by thankfulness. Everybody else gets to live this way. In verse 5, for this you know that no fornicator, unclean person, nor covetous man, who is an idolater, has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. All right, no one. All right, not one person. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. All right, anybody who doesn't obey is a son of disobedience. There's a lot of people. Therefore, do not be partakers with them, for you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. All right, there it is in verse 9. You were once darkness, but now you are somebody else. Okay, you were one of these people, but now you are not. Now you are somebody else. Now you walk by the love that he has for you, and you walk by thankfulness. Everybody else, what do they got? What do they got left? What have they got to look forward to? If a person does not know the love of God, there really is no alternative but to pursue sin, to try and find fulfillment for the deepest needs that we have as a person. According to our design, God created us to need love, right? If you're not going to be loved by God, hey, fornication is an alternative. Somebody will pretend to love you, or maybe they will kind of love you, but still, the point is that we have a need to be loved. And if we're not going to be loved by our God, we're going to be driven to find love someplace else. Okay, that's just the way things are. So Paul describes two different kinds of people between the saved and the lost. And I want you to understand that there are two different kinds of lost people. I'll come back to that in just a minute. All right, but you are a child of light, you are a child of God, you are a different person. Okay, now he says, let these things not be a part of your life. He doesn't say, make sure that these things are not a part of your life, or God will kill you. He will bring his wrath down upon you. That's not what he says. All right, although that's what a lot of people in the religious world, in Christianity especially, that's what they say. That's the message. Get your flesh under control or the wrath of God will come upon you. And that's not what Paul says here. What he says is that you are somebody different. Be who you are. You are a person who should put these things out of your life. So just do that. Not because of your concern for punishment or lack of reward, but just because you are a different person, a completely different person entirely, all right? You're a whole different person. For those who are not that other, this new kind of person, okay, you've got two different groups of people. But for those, that is who he is referring to. He's saying that these are the sons of disobedience who are going to experience the wrath of God. Right? You are not considered to be a son of disobedience or daughter respectively. You're not considered to be that kind of a person, not because you don't obey, but you are not considered to be that kind of a person because of what God has done for you. Right? So even though you may be disobedient, you are not a disobedient person. All right? Your behavior, all right, is a reflection of where you're at in your personal growth experience at the time. But it is not a way of defining who you are as a person. You are a saved person who on occasion is engaging in sin, who is engaging in disobedience, but that's not who you are. That is something for you to let go of. Okay? And that's going to be a lifelong experience of just letting go of these things. The wrath of God is not coming upon you because of what he has done for you. You are a child of God because of what he has done for you. As soon as you assert obedience or disobedience, well, then it's over. It's all about what you do or don't do instead of what he has done already. Those are the two different ways of life. You have to pick one or the other. Okay, now for those who are in this category of disobedience, you need to see that there are two different kinds of people who can fit into this category. You've got those who do not acknowledge the existence of God and those who do. Just because they acknowledge the existence of God doesn't mean that they are a child of God. All right? It doesn't mean that. Even if they want to say that they're a Christian, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're a child of God. Right? It really does depend on what they really believe and whether God is okay with the conviction of this person in terms of their belief in the truth. And we are fortunate that God gets to make those decisions. We don't have to try to figure those things out. All that we are to do is to be as true as we can in the pursuit of the knowledge of the truth. But there are two different kinds of people. You have one kind of person who lives for the indulgence of the flesh, and you've got another kind of person who lives for the restraint of the flesh. All right? Those are the two different people who are in the category of the sons of disobedience. Those who live for the indulgence of the flesh and those who live by the restraint of the flesh. How do we live? We live walking in the love that God has given to us. We live in the inheritance that he has given to us. That's a different way of life. All right? When you live for the indulgence of the flesh or the restraint of the flesh, either way, you are living by the flesh. All right? That's what it means. You are living by the flesh. When you live in a different way of walking in the love of God according to the inheritance that you have received as a child of God, you are walking in the Spirit. All right. So whether you live by the indulgence of the flesh or the restraint of the flesh, you're still living by the flesh. And that's the challenge that most people who are in the Christian world are dealing with, is they are still living by the flesh. Not the indulgence of it so much, but they're trying to live by the restraint of it. And how's that working out? It's not. Because the more a person tries to live for the restraint of the flesh, the more that sin gets stirred up within them. All right? There are 4 fundamental ways that sin gets stirred up even more. The first is just the natural rebellion of humanity. All right? There's a lot of us that deal with that issue. If somebody tells us what not to do, we will feel inspired to do it just to assert the fact, look, I am God, or I'm close to it, or I'm an independent person. I'm my own person. Don't be telling me what to do or what not to do. I'm going to do it just in order to make the point. There's this natural rebellion of humanity that exists in a lot of people. Maybe you don't deal with that. Good for you. I don't really deal with that myself either. But, there's lots of people who do. So there's the natural rebellion of humanity that results in an increase in sin. He's obviously giving you more things to think about not doing. If he gives you the list, make sure you're not engaged in fornication. Check every day and be sure that you are not doing any foolish talking. You didn't say anything foolishly. Let's review and check and think about our day and all the conversations that we had and make sure we figure out, was I talking foolishly? If I was, I better ask God for forgiveness, right? That's what you end up with. And the more you think about these things, the more you're going to want to do it. How about coveting? He says the covetous person, right? Covetousness, don't do that, and you're going to be thinking, okay, well, what should I not be coveting? Oh, look at that over there. I need to be sure that I don't covet that, right? And then, after a while, you can start to think, but that seems kind of good. It seems kind of appealing. It seems kind of attractive. Oh, you're on the way. You're on the way. You're on your way to being coveted. It stirs up more sin. Okay, it stirs up more sin. What happens when you feel that you have succeeded? All right, what happens? You have succeeded. You have overcome the indulgence of the flesh. You restrain your flesh perfectly. Now you got the sin of religious pride, and that's going to show up in all kinds of different ways that you may not notice at all, but the people around you definitely will. Okay, they're going to see your religious pride, and it's going to be a big turnoff. It's going to be really disgusting. They're going to, they're going to be thinking, yeah, well, I can list out a few sins that I think you've got that are being expressed, and so it's the religious pride that stirs up different kinds of sins through the belief. All right, and that's all it is. It's a belief that you have succeeded to restrain your flesh. Okay, and then what? Then there's another way that the law stirs up sin. When you fail, okay, because you will at something. All right, if you want to hold to the belief that you are never going to sin in any way whatsoever again for the rest of your life. All right, if you want to hold to that belief, well, the first thing is that people around you are going to think of you as being a really boring person, I suppose. Just thought I'd throw that in there. But no, seriously, if you really want to believe that, then all I can say is that you have definitely been totally deceived. You do not know the God that I know. All right, you're just not in the same category as I am in any way whatsoever. We don't have anything in common. We don't believe in the same God. We just don't, and I would not try to pretend to. Okay, so when you sin, not if, but when it happens, well, according to the sons of disobedience, God does not love you. Not like he would otherwise. He does not accept you. You are not approved of. He is ashamed to have any, association with you in any way whatsoever. You are a son of disobedience, that his wrath needs to be exercised and surely will be. Okay? Now, when you are not loved by your God, if this is how he relates to you, well, then he certainly is not going to be meeting the deepest needs that you have for love and acceptance, is he? You're not going to be receptive to that. And so what are you going to do in order to meet the needs that you have for love and acceptance? You're going to engage in sin. There's no alternative. All right? If you're not going to be loved by God, you have no alternative but to engage in sin, even if it's just foolish talking. All right? That's what it means. Okay? That's how the pursuit of repentance and obedience results in an increase in sin, not a reduction in sin. All right. Now, you might get a person's flesh under control in some ways and see a reduction of sin in some aspects, which is good. I don't want to say that there's anything evil about that. What I'm wanting to say is that sin will still be stirred up in greater ways, in other ways, in different ways, in many ways you never would have even thought that it would have even occurred. Okay? There's no escape from this. It's either live by the flesh or live by the Spirit. And those who live by the flesh live for either the indulgence of the flesh or the restraint of the flesh. But either way, it's still a life of living by the flesh, which will result in an increase in sin. And you have to understand this, or it's going to be a problem. All right, it's just simply going to be a problem. So, going to verse 5, this is Ephesians chapter 5, verse 5. For this you know, that no fornicator, unclean person, nor covetous man who is an idolater has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. Right? If you are one of these people, you have no inheritance in the kingdom of God. But if you are a child of God, then you have an inheritance in the kingdom of God. So what he does is he makes a division between two different kinds of people between verses 2 and verse 3. And he takes some time to speak to those people who are living by the flesh, the indulgence of the flesh and the restraint of the flesh, to lead them to the point of recognizing that they have no inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. They therefore cannot embrace anything that he has already said in chapters 1 through 4. So a person can go through this, make it to chapter 5, and he says, you have no concept, no clue of what it means to live in the inheritance that he described from chapter 1. You're still in the category of the sons of disobedience if this is how you are trying to live. Either the indulgence of the flesh according to these descriptions, or the restraint of the flesh according to these descriptions. By either doing these things or trying not to do these things, it's still the same category. Verse 6, let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Okay, the wrath of God comes upon a person who sins. All right. Now, the wrath doesn't have to be all that complicated. One day you are going to go into the presence of God. When you physically die, you're going to be brought before God. You're not going to be able to get away from that. I'm sure angels are going to make the delivery, and you're not going to be able to get away from them. You are going to be delivered, and you're going to stand effectively in the presence of God. And he's going to ask, the simple question, are you spiritually dead or are you spiritually alive? Are you a child of God or are you not? Okay? And if you are not, then you go to the place, for those people. And if you are spiritually alive through the gospel, then you have a place among the living. Right? Those who depart are going to experience the wrath of God in that context. In comparison of having a place in his home, the alternative is an expression of wrath. where you're going to be without him in a place that is unpleasant, and that's going to be an eternal decision. There will be no change to that decision. Okay, so this is for the sons of disobedience. If you want to try to live by repentance and obedience, you will not be able to do it perfectly. Therefore, you will be in the category of being a son of disobedience, and your inheritance will be the wrath of God. All right, that's just how it is. Let no one deceive you with empty words. This is the bottom line. All right, our only hope is the forgiveness of God. Obedience means nothing. Disobedience means nothing. It's only the forgiveness of God. That's it. Okay, but that's unacceptable for those people who want to live for the restraint of the flesh. For the people who live by the restraint of the flesh, it's not just about forgiveness, it's about obedience. Okay? And that becomes a contradiction. All right. Therefore, verse 7, therefore, do not be partakers with them. All right. Now, if you are a partaker with them, if you start talking foolishly, right, or if you covet something, or if you jest in a coarse way, maybe if you jest, but it's not so coarse, right? I mean, we got to come up with a whole list of laws to define what it means to jest in a coarse manner rather than in a not so coarse manner, right? I mean, this is what people come up with. But if this is going to be the way that people think, this is going to be how they live, you can engage in these things, but you are still not that kind of person. All right, so even if a person behaves in a way that is contrary to who they are, that just shows that this person needs to be loved more. They need to rest in the inheritance more. It's a good indicator. But that doesn't mean that you have become that kind of person. You have been made into a new person who is still struggling with these things, who is still engaged in these things. But, look, I mean, when a person, look at it from this point of view, when a person first gets saved, do you expect them to now live a completely sinless life from day one? There's going to be growth. There's going to be change. Some things a person is going to get over. Some things a person will let go. Other things they just simply won't. God has to work with us in the midst of our sinfulness. All right, again, God has to work with us in the midst of our sinfulness. He has to love us in the midst of our sinfulness. All right, that is the relationship. It is a relationship now where He can dwell within you in the midst of your struggles and your sinfulness, so that He can have some kind of a relationship with you, such that you can begin to grow in an understanding of who He is as a person. All right, and to rest in what He has for you, mostly, of course, Himself. All right, so you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Just simply walk as you are. So don't be partakers in that kind of stuff. Now walk in something else. And what is that? Walk as children of light. What would be walking as children of light? I believe that verse 2 is the parallel passage to this. Walking in love. All right, and this does not mean walking in a loving attitude towards everybody else, although I do believe that that's a good side effect. It is about walking in the love that God has for you. And again, if you believe that He relates to you on the basis of a system of law, then you will never be loved by Him. You will never have the love to walk in. So walking as a child of light is walking in the love that God has for you. That's what it means to walk in the light. Verse 9, for the fruit of the Spirit is all goodness, righteousness, and truth, All right, now the fruit of the Spirit is what he gives to you. All right, it's the fruit of the Spirit. Most people like to think of it, oh, it's my fruit. No, it's his fruit. And that's what he gives. All right, he gives to you goodness, righteousness, and truth because of what he's done. For you. You have righteousness because of what he has done for you. He has conveyed truth to you and continues to do so. You are recognized as being good because of what he's done. Not because of what you do, but because of what he has done. This is the fruit of the Spirit, of him. Verse 10, finding out what is acceptable to the Lord. Finding out what is acceptable to the Lord, that's a discovery. All right, that is a discovery. And why would you need to find out what is acceptable when you've got the law that says this is acceptable and this is not acceptable? Think about it for a minute. This must be something else, right? Finding out what is acceptable to the Lord. What could that be? Just go to the law. No coveting, no fornication, no foolish talking, no coarse jesting, no uncleanness. That's what it means to be acceptable to God, or what is acceptable to him and what isn't. No, you will find out what is acceptable to God when you know him, and you know him in the relationship that has to do with living by the Spirit, not living by the flesh. So what are some of the things that you can discover are acceptable to God? Well, let's start with walking in the love that he has for you. If you will be loved by your God, he will convey that this is acceptable. All right? To be loved by God is acceptable. This is something for you to find out. Do you think that if a religious person, that a religious person who lives for the restraint of the flesh, are they ever going to know the love of God? Is it acceptable for them to be loved by God? Not until they get their flesh under control 100%, so they will never find that out. They will never find out what it means to be loved by God. What is acceptable? It is to God. It is acceptable to be loved by him. It is acceptable to be accepted by him. These are things to find out that you would never find out otherwise. It's acceptable to live by the inheritance. You're going to find out that this is acceptable. All right? And that you don't have to live according to the flesh, either the indulgence or the restraint. You can live by the Spirit through a personal relationship with a person. To participate in the things that he is doing, and for him to participate in the things that you are doing. And obviously not everything about life is about sin. There's lots of things about life that have nothing to do with sin at all. And to be a participant in these things is good. Finding out what is acceptable. It describes an experience of discovery. You will have a time of discovering what is acceptable to God. All right. For those of you who are using this for your small groups, that's my question. What is acceptable to the Lord? How would you answer that? This is how I would answer it. Maybe you've got a different way of describing it. So, let's give it a try. What is acceptable to the Lord? What really is acceptable? And I'll continue into verse 11, following in the next message. Thanks.